Welcome to this webinar on entering your first dog event. I'm going to keep this sort of general and try to make it so that whatever type of dog sport or event that you're thinking of entering, this will give you some idea for some things to think about beforehand, and kind of a plan to make that first event as successful as it can possibly be for you. Just a little bit about myself. I suspect if you're watching this, you probably are a little bit familiar with either me personally or with some of my programs. But I am a professional dog trainer, have been for many years, starting in the assistance dog industry. But I've also been involved in dog sports and dog competition since I started as a junior handler a pretty long time ago at this point. So I've done quite a few different activities, mostly with my PBGBs, also with Australian Shepherds. I have a Golden Retriever, and I've had a GBGB in the past. Um, so I do train dogs professionally. I judge a couple different events also, so I have seen dog events from that perspective. But one of my favorite parts of my job as a dog trainer is working with people who are new to dog sports and showing them just how fun and just how much this can be a really great hobby and a great way to bond more with your dog and just have a really um, just that it can be a really great world to get into. Okay. So the big thing to think about, or one of the big things to think about, is when you are ready to enter in the first place. And there's some things to think about. Going to class and training and things like that is definitely part of it. But you want to make sure that you really do understand the rules and exactly what is expected of you for whatever sport that you're entering. So rule books tend to be really long and really boring and not always the most accessible or fun reading. But honestly, you really do need to read the rules. Pretty much any entry form that you sign is going to say that you have read and understand the rules. So you should really do that. But that can also potentially save you some pitfalls or maybe just some misunderstandings about what is and isn't allowed, because there is quite a bit of variation between the different sports. But even within a sport, because most sports have different organizations that have different rules and different policies and things like that. So it is a good idea to have an idea of what's expected. Um, I think it's always great to attend an event as a spectator or volunteer beforehand, just because reading it and seeing it can be very different things. Even if you're an experienced dog person entering a particular type of event for the first time, I think going and watching one, if you can possibly make it work, is a good idea. If you're working with an instructor, especially an in-person instructor, definitely a good idea to get their take on it. Hopefully, the instructor you're working with understands your goals and it also competes, or at least has some history of competing or a good understanding of the sport that you want to enter, because they can definitely help you with the decision as to whether you're ready or maybe whether doing a little bit more training would be helpful to you. There's a big variation among dog sports as to how long you need to train. Some sports like agility and competition obedience can literally require years of training before you would enter. Whereas other things like Fast Cat and to an extent scent work, you can definitely train for less time. And in the case of Fast Cat, sometimes no time at all, and just go ahead and give it a try. And then the last thing to think about when you're deciding whether to enter is, can your dog do the things not just in your familiar training class or training space at home, but in a pretty wide variety of environments? So, have you taken it on the road a little bit, maybe gone to some practice competitions, or have you just limited your training to one or two places? Dogs, as a rule, don't generalize well, so you do want to make sure that whatever you're going to ask them to do in competition, you've asked them to do in a bunch of different locations beforehand. Okay. So again, I can't stress this enough. Please read the rules before you enter. It's really an expectation that you will have, and I think it's something that a lot of people don't do, but it is a good idea to have a pretty good understanding. Also, not a bad thing if there are any supporting documents, particularly judges' guidelines. Look through those too. Maybe you don't, if you're not actually a judge, you may not need to read them in as much detail. But in some cases, judges' guidelines can give you a pretty good understanding of not just what the rules are, but also how they may be interpreted and things like that. So it is a good idea to at least glance through judges' guidelines if they exist. And in this day and age, videos of competitions are pretty widely available. And in the case of things like agility and rally, where course maps are a thing, course maps are out there too. Facebook groups can be a good way to look for these, sometimes YouTube. realize that whenever you get into social media, some groups are more beginner friendly, and maybe more positive experiences in general than others. So you always have to take social media with a grain of salt. But if you just want to watch video of dogs working, that can definitely be a good source. So go ahead and dig into that also, because I think, again, seeing it is easier than reading about it in a lot of cases. Okay. Okay, so where do you find events in the first place is another big question. And if you're used to one type of event, sometimes where you have to look for others can be different. If we're looking for AKC, the most AKC events of any kind, the easiest way to do it, I think, at least to get the initial what is available where, is to go onto the AKC website in their event search. You can choose what kind of events you're looking for, and you can look for more than one kind of event if you are somebody who does all the things. And you can also say, I'm looking for events specifically within X number of miles of my zip code. So it doesn't give you the entire country, it does narrow it down for you. So that can usually be a good way of looking. For breed shows, sometimes the individual superintendents, usually the individual superintendents are a good place to look, but in many parts of the country, not every show has the same superintendent. So you're still not going to have a comprehensive list necessarily unless you happen to know which one to look on. If you're doing something that's not AKC, maybe CPE or CWAGs, anything like that, those organizations' websites will typically have some sort of event calendar also. And you, a lot of times, if you just know, like, I like to go to events at this particular location, things like that, you can sometimes search that way too. But you really want to go on the main sponsoring organization's website, I think, to get the most comprehensive list. And what you're looking for usually is to find a premium list, because that will give you some of the details about how entries are accepted, which varies quite a bit, who's judging, which as you get more experienced, you'll probably have more opinions on that. But if you are working closely with an instructor, it never hurts to run judge names by them if you're not sure, especially if it's your first time, because some judges may give beginners a better experience than others might. Or even just to ask them about, like, hey, is this a good facility for a dog that's not as experienced, or should I look for someplace that might be a little bit quieter, things like that. So the premium list is going to give you all that kind of information. How to enter is also one of those things that can be very sport specific. Pretty much all events will have a closing date. Some of the non-AKC events and very, very few AKC events may accept day of show entries if space is available, but a closing date is something that you should expect, and it will typically be 2.5 weeks or more before the event. If you're looking for breed ring or confirmation events, it's pretty much always going to be a Wednesday at noon, but for other sports, that varies quite a bit. Opening dates are a thing more so in some sports than others. Um, and there are some events that do tend to fill very quickly. AKC scent work trials are one of them. If you're a PBGB person, the hunts typically you need to enter on opening day. So there are some things that you need to think about. Do I need to worry about opening day? Always closing day is a thing, but there are some events where if you wait till closing day, you are not going to get in. And really, sometimes if you wait till 5 minutes after opening on opening day, you may not get in. More and more events offer online entries, which, even if you pay a service fee or a credit card fee, a lot of times are your best way, but something that's really important to you because you'll know right away that you're in. So the convenience of that can be a pretty big deal. Generally, if something is opening day and it's first received, it's going to be the received date, not the mail date. Definitely closing dates are not the date you put it in the mailbox, but the date it is actually in the trial secretary's hand, which is an important thing to remember, especially as the Postal Service has gotten to be pretty seriously unreliable. Again, that's where sometimes doing online can be a good idea. There are a few events where overnight mail is really the only way to get in, but again, that's gotten pretty expensive and isn't ever really guaranteed anymore, so sometimes not your best bet. But online can also be, or overnight can sometimes be what you need to do also. For different events, there are Novice A and Novice B classes. Most of the time, Novice A is what you would enter if you're brand new to that sport, or brand new to dog sports overall. Scent work has muddied the waters a little bit, because for scent work, you're eligible to enter Novice A if that dog is new to the sport, even if you are not. But generally, novice A is going to be if you're brand new to something. Novice B is going to be if you've done this before with another dog. Scent work, as I said, is kind of the exception to that. Anybody who enters novice B will always be fine, but if you enter novice A when you're not supposed to, then you can sometimes get in trouble and have awards taken away and take legs and titles taken away. So it is important to know the rules as far as what you can enter. Again, read the rule book. Okay, so you've entered your show, you're excited. You do want to make sure that you get some sort of confirmation that you're in. And again, that will tell you things like the time, when you need to be there. In some cases, wait lists can be something that you may find yourself on if you maybe didn't quite get it in on opening day and the event filled. Some events will keep wait lists. Sometimes wait lists are right up until the day of the event. If space opens up and somebody doesn't show up, you get to play. Other times there's a cutoff period for the wait list. Generally, if you're on a waiting list and you don't get offered a spot, in fact, always you will get your money back. And normally, if you are entered at a show and can't go, you don't get your money back. But the exception can be sometimes if there are people on a waiting list and you let the trial secretary know you're not coming. Sometimes there can be exceptions and you actually do get a refund. But either way, you do want to make sure that you open your entry confirmations and read them and check for mistakes. Most of the time for performance events, they do confirm entries before closing. Most of the time for breed shows, they do not. Or if you're entering a rally or obedience trial in conjunction with a breed show, they don't. So if you're planning, taking time off of work, traveling across the country, it's a big deal to you and you want confirmation, either enter online because that will give you a little bit more proof that you entered, or just contact them before closing, not after, to make sure. Yeah, you're kind of bugging them, but on the other hand, it's better than making travel plans and things like that and then finding out at the last minute you didn't get in. Judging programs will usually be mailed out at least a week before the trial, sometimes a little more, occasionally a little less. You should read the program carefully. It will probably tell you what time you are likely to show. Sometimes those times are written in stone and they won't start before a certain time, or at least they won't start before a certain time unless everyone's there. Other times, particularly for agility, those are estimates, which means that, if it's bad weather and a lot of people are absent, or if a course runs really fast and they get ahead of schedule, they might be ahead of schedule, which means you could show up at the time that it says on the confirmation and your class might already be done. So you want to read carefully and just determine what it says. For breed shows, it's generally more written in stone kind of thing that they won't start early, but for performance events, that's not always the case. So just read those confirmations closely. Okay, what do you want to bring with you? The more you do dog events, I think the more stuff you end up with. It's just one of those things that probably happens with any hobby. But even for your first event, there are things that you'll want to bring to try to keep yourself and your dog as comfortable as possible. Really, a dog that's going to be competing in any event needs to be comfortable in a crate. And that's not something that you want to start a week before the show. Hopefully your dog is already crate trained at home, but I know that that's not as universal for people that are new to dog sports or outside of the dog show world as I think sometimes those of us in the dog show world think that it is. But you also want your dog comfortable in a crate away from home, whether that's in your car if you're planning to work from the car. Some events that works, sometimes it doesn't. But also potentially being crated in a more crowded dog show kind of environment. I know one thing that I never mind my in-person students doing that you might think about is bring a crate to class with you. Have it be the crate that you plan to take to the show so your dog gets comfortable in that particular crate. And have your dog wait their turn at class in the crate while their classmates are working, especially if they're used to just hanging out with you on leash. It might be a little bit of culture shock for them at the beginning, but it is something that they're going to need to be able to deal with. It's very hard for a dog to perform at their best at a show if they don't know how to settle down and rest in between classes. And crate training is really the way to do that. I don't really have another option for you. Okay, you also want to make sure you bring whatever equipment you need for your sport, which for some sports you don't really need much, but you might need, if you're doing scent work, you might need your handler discrimination item, If you're showing in the breed ring, you're definitely, even for a smooth coated dog, going to need some sort probably of grooming supplies. And if it's not a smooth coated dog, you might need a whole lot of grooming supplies. If you're showing in upper levels of obedience, you'll need dumbbells. You want to remember all those things. You also want to know what kind of equipment you are allowed to use on the showgrounds, not just in the ring, but when you're walking around, because that does vary from sport to sport and organization to organization. It might make sense to use something a little bit higher management, like a front clip harness or a head halter if it's allowed on the grounds, to manage your dog outside the ring, even if you're not using those things in the ring. But there are some definite restrictions, especially at AKC events, as far as what is and isn't allowed. So again, read the rules. Um, if you are using something that's not legal equipment, make sure that you've weaned off of that and have another way of safely managing your dog in the trial environment before the day before the show. Um, I think part of why we tend to accumulate so much stuff is eventually you have all the things for hot weather and all the things for cool weather. And if you're outside, you have to think about rain gear and cold weather gear and all that kind of stuff for you as well. The more uncomfortable you are, probably the less you're going to be supporting your dog the way they need. So it is worth investing in whatever you and your dog need to be comfortable, especially if you're doing outdoor events. In my part of the country, more and more events are inside, which is great. But for sports like scent work, even if we're trialing inside, a lot of times you have to work from the car. And if it's 20 degrees out, work from the car can be sort of unpleasant if you don't really plan ahead. Also, in the hot weather, you have to be careful. But I'm one of those people that finds 20 degrees a lot less pleasant than 80 degrees. I don't know. You want to bring things to reward your dog. In most sports, you can't bring that reward in the ring, but that doesn't mean you don't want to have it with you. Performance dogs aren't working for free, they're just working for a delayed paycheck, is kind of a good way to think about it. And I usually recommend for pretty much any dog that you bring something a little more interesting to the trial than what you might bring when you're just training at home or training in your regular training class. I know the way we do it with our dogs is they pretty much get kibble and boring stuff around the house. They get higher value, more interesting dog treats when we're training away from home. And it shows they get meatballs and chicken hearts and really, really good stuff. Um, so think about what will work for your dog, but it is usually a good idea if you step up the rewards a little bit. And you probably want to have a reward station like a mat or at least a bag or bucket, something to keep your stuff with you at ringside that's a little bit portable. Sometimes your crate or chair can be close to the ring, but sometimes it can't. So it's just good to have a plan for how you're going to have everything that you need to have near the ring, as close to the ring as possible. Leaving random meatballs laying on the ground at a trial is kind of not cool. And it's likely that somebody's dog, potentially mine, is going to come along and steal your meatball. So have it in a bag or a container or something that is dog proof, not just from your dog, but potentially from other people's dogs. Okay. Yeah, what to bring is a long list. We all tend to have a lot of stuff. It is always a good practice to video your runs in competition. You may want to share it with your instructor later. If it's a really amazing run, you might want to share it on social media with the whole world later. It used to be that we carried video cameras to shows, but now we're all pretty lucky to have a really powerful one in our pockets. So that makes it easier that you already have what you need. And it's usually not too hard to find someone to video you, but a tripod works pretty well also. Think about how you're going to keep yourself comfortable, whether that's headphones, books, food and drink is nice. Sometimes there's food available at shows, sometimes there's not. Sometimes it's good, often it's not. So sometimes packing your own food can be more comfortable. And think about what your dog needs. Maybe they need a bone to chew on to keep them busy while they're waiting their turn. Water dish, water from home is always a good idea. If you got any kind of entry confirmation paperwork, bring that or at least have the digital copy on your phone. I think it's also a good idea to have the rule book available. Again, digital copy on a phone or iPad is totally fine, but sometimes you might want to look something up last minute, and it's just good to have those resources there. And you might need a luggage cart or a dolly or some way of hauling all this stuff, especially if you're traveling by yourself or if you have a really big dog where their stuff is bigger. Okay, so staying overnight for shows is something that Usually you probably won't do for your first couple events. People tend to stay kind of close to home for that. But maybe your first dog show is a national specialty or something bigger, or maybe you just live in an area where there aren't the kind of events that you want to do close to home. And dog events can start kind of crazy early in the morning. 7 a.m. walkthroughs and agility are sadly not all that unusual. So you may think about looking for a hotel. Typically, hotel information is available on the premium list for the show. And those will usually be places that will allow dogs, obviously, because they're listing them on the premium list. Just try to practice good etiquette if you're staying in a hotel. It's getting harder and harder for clubs to find places where dogs are allowed. So if you're at the hotel, they should be on leash just like they would be at the showgrounds. If you're in, you probably don't want to, you definitely shouldn't leave your dog loose in a hotel room. So crate them if they'll be quiet. Otherwise, just take them with you or get delivery or something like that if they're not going to be quiet. A lot of times, even if you're in the room, some dogs that aren't used to hotels will get barky. So if you're crating them not right on top of the door or using a white noise machine or keeping a TV or some music on, a lot of times can go a long way towards keeping dogs quieter in hotels. If you have an RV or a camper, that is, to me, the best way to go. But probably if you're brand new to dog sports, that's not something you have access to yet. Okay. So when you're getting to the show, some things to think about. It's never really a good idea to be in a hurry. So try to plan things that you don't have to rush. Depending on the sport, usually 30 to 60 minutes before the class time is enough, even if you need to take a few minutes to unload. But if your first event is a breed show and you have a hairy dog like a PBGV, you probably need at least an hour, especially if you need to get set up in a grooming area and things like that. So just think about how much time you need. Um, if you're going to crate indoors, when you first walk in, leave your dog in the car and just come in with your stuff. Find a spot, get set up, and then bring the dog in. For breed shows, sometimes finding crating space can be a whole lot harder because the professional handlers will come in with a zillion dogs and they get there the day before and kind of take most of the space. But if you are coming in just by yourself for a day or two, or particularly if it's just one day, you can always ask if they have day crating, which is a space where you can't leave your things overnight. But if you're just showing one day, it can be a way to actually get a spot, which can sometimes be difficult at some of the crowded indoor shows. Definitely obey the rules no matter what. So if it says no crating here, don't crate there, don't block doors and fire extinguishers and things like that. But if you get there and there really is no space, it is completely fair to ask somebody for help finding a spot, whether that's a member of the show committee. Some of the bigger events will actually have site control guys that are there and they will help you find a spot. So don't be afraid to ask. And don't be afraid to say, hey, it's my first time. I'm not quite sure if it's okay to go here. I think most people at dog events really will go out of their way to help a first timer. They certainly should. And I think in most cases they will. So don't be afraid to ask for help if you really aren't sure where it's okay to go. Depending on the event, you will need to check in someplace to let them know that you're there. If you're doing breed or obedience or rally, you probably just go to your ring and let the steward know what your armband number is and they'll check you in. If you're doing agility, the check-in is usually just a board that you can self-check in. You can always ask somebody for help with doing that if you need. But if you're competing in agility for the first time, your dog will need to get measured. So you do want to refer to your confirmation to find out when measuring will be available and whether it will be an official measurement or if it's just a judge of record measurement. If it's an official measurement, then that will count permanently. In most cases, you'll need two of them, but that would actually get you one of your official measurements. But if there's not an official measuring person there, you just have to get measured by the judge of record for the day. And in that case, it would only count for the weekend. Lure coursing, everybody has to bring their dog to check in. That's the only sport where you really, unless you need to get measured for agility, would bring your dog with you to check in. For lure coursing, they may need to measure. They check to see if the dogs are sound. And if you have a bitch, they will check to see if she's in season. Bitches in season are pretty much not allowed at any performance event, but for reasons I don't fully understand, lure coursing is the only one where they actually check. But they will, and even if your girl is spayed, they will make you swipe and just prove that she's not in season anyway. If you happen to be entered in more than one event or more than one class at the same event, It's always a good idea if you think that things might be at the same time to let the stewards in both rings know as early as possible. If your conflict is with the breed ring, they're not going to be able to do anything for you. You're kind of stuck. You have to show an order there. But for performance events, they will usually let you go out of order, but within your class. So if it's conflict between the breed ring and something else, try to move into something else. Just realize that you have to be there while your class is still going. You can't just show up whenever in most cases because they're not going to reset a course for you or something like that. Depending on the sport, you may get a judge's briefing and or a walkthrough. In agility, we get 8 minutes to walk the course. In rally, you get 10, which I've never quite understood because agility courses tend to be more complicated than rally. For scent work, barn hunt, and obedience class, and some obedience classes, usually just the novice and beginner novice, there will be somewhat of a judge's briefing. Sometimes you'll get to see search areas or at least get a description of them. Some judges prefer to answer questions on the start line for scent work. Um, but anytime there is a walkthrough, it is always a walkthrough without the dog, which is one of those reasons why you need to have a crate with you. If you're the first dog in, you might opt to have a friend hold your dog close by, especially for things like obedience and rally, where they don't have a set time after the walkthrough before the first dog. But this is a time where you need to have a way of not having your dog with you. That crate's also going to come in handy for things like when you need to use the restroom or go get lunch or just when your dog needs a break. So really, I can't stress the importance of getting your dog comfortable in a crate before you go to your first show. Okay. You will tend to develop a warm up routine over time. It's usually something that takes a little bit of practice and maybe not dogs, maybe a little bit dog specific. You may find that one dog needs a little more, one dog needs a little less if you're working with multiple dogs. If nothing else, always make sure your dog has a bathroom break as close to when you go in the ring as possible. For performance events, eliminating in the ring is always going to be an automatic, non qualifying run. You'll be excused from the ring. It tends to be sort of annoying to the judge and other exhibitors because you delay the judging time and because they have to clean up after your dog. And it can also be distracting to other dogs. So accidents happen, but try to have it not happen. I know the dogs are allowed to eliminate in the breed ring, and some people let their male dogs pee on things pretty regularly in the breed ring, but it's still kind of not cool. So just exercise your dog, give them a chance to potty so that they don't have to go in the ring. How early you get your dog out depends, but 5 to 10 minutes for most sports is pretty good. Longer than that may be too much for some dogs. And remember, you can reward your dog during the warm up. They can't have treats in the ring for most of our sports, but during the warm up, they absolutely can. So you'll figure out what routine works for your dog. In agility, you have access to a warm up jump. In scent work, you'll have access to warm up boxes. Just use those for a quick warm up. It's not the time to train a skill your dog doesn't already know. So try to be thoughtful about it. But that is definitely something that you have access to in those sports. The warm up jump in agility is the only time your dog can be off leash at a trial site. And in general, if you're warming up for things like rally and obedience, your dogs should not be off leash. Sometimes you will see people who know better taking their leash off and get away with it, but really the rules say that the dog is supposed to be on leash for all of that. Okay. All right. So once you're in the ring, it is what it is at that point. Just have a good time. Try to give your dog a good experience. If you really feel like you and your dog are not having a good experience in pretty much all sports now, you are allowed to ask to be excused. So if it's really not going well, you can do that, but really just try to have a good time. Maybe you'll have a qualifying run. Maybe you'll have a really successful first show. Maybe you'll learn something that you need to work on so that you can have a better experience at the next show. Either way, there's value in it, even if it's just giving you information about where you are in your training. But just try to have a good time. Make sure that your dog has a good time. And just at that point, it is what it is. There's not really a lot you can do to change things in the ring. So just have a good time and go with it. After the show, or after you come out of the ring, really not after the show, go reward your dog. Really, no matter what, especially if it's your first show, he did the best he could. Maybe it was hard for him, maybe it was hard for you. I know this is going to come as a shock, but sometimes you guys don't handle as good as you do at class or in practice when you go to your first dog show, because not only do dogs sometimes do strange things when they're nervous, but so do we. So just realize your dog did the best he could for you. Give them their rewards, really, no matter what happened. Take them for a walk, maybe give them another potty break before you put them away. Do remember that you may have to go back in the ring. In the breed ring, if you place first in your class, you definitely do. But if you place second, you need to hang around and see if the dog that placed above you gets winners, because then you would go back in for reserve. In the obedience ring, if you are qualifying on the earlier exercises in the novice class, you would need to go back in for sits and downs. They will invite you back. If the judge invites you back, it means that you so far have a qualifying score. So if you want to keep that qualifying score, you need to accept the invitation and go back. So just realize that even though it sounds like an invitation, it really is this is something you want to do kind of thing. Very rarely in sports like agility, there's a runoff, but most cases, that's not really something you need to worry about. But there are times where just because you've left the ring doesn't mean you're totally done. Another reason you might need to go back in the ring is to get your ribbons. In some sports like agility and scent work, ribbons just tend to be self-service. And if you're new, somebody can show you how to do that and where to get your ribbons. Most of the time, this trial secretary will print out a sticker. You want to pick up the sticker. Even if you choose not to take ribbons, you want the sticker because that's your verification that you got your qualifying run. It's basically proof, so that if something goes wrong, something doesn't get recorded right, you'll have something that you can take to AKC to show that, yes, actually, we did earn this qualifying score. In some sports like obedience and rally, they do still have you come back in the ring and they hand out ribbons. It's up to you if you want to take your dog into the ring with you for that. But if you do, remember, you still can't have any food or toys or anything like that in the ring. But you should take your dog in, especially if it's your first time. Be proud of what you did. If you earn a qualifying score at one of your first events, then you have really accomplished something, and it's a big deal. So along those same lines, take pictures, post them on social media, tag your instructor, tag your dog's breeder. Just have a good time with it. Enjoy the moment. And even if your first trial is more of a lesson than a victory, you should still enjoy the experience. And just think about what you might want to do different next time. Even if it's a victory, there will probably be some things you might want to do different next time. So afterwards, if it's a multiple day show, you might be able to leave your crate and stuff in the building if you have an extra one, which again is also why we all end up with so much stuff, that we have extras that we can leave in the building. But it is nice to not have to unload every day. If you took a video, consider sharing that video with your instructor. Again, if it was fabulous, you might want to share it with the whole world, but if nothing else, maybe share it with the people that are helping you train, because they might see some things that you don't. Take some notes in your training journal about what went well, what didn't go as well, and then decide, are you going to enter again, or do you want to go back to the drawing board, do a little bit of training, and then decide where to go from there. Either way, try to get as much, whether it was a victory or not a victory, try to think about how you can make the next time that much better, that much more fun, maybe that much more successful for you and your dog. Okay. Thank you for joining me today for this. I will be upfront with my first time trying to record a presentation. I'm not exactly sure how this is going to be posted. I need to figure that out. But it will be posted in a format somewhere where hopefully you will have the opportunity to ask questions if you have any.